How's the form? Thanks for joining us. It's episode 7 of The Ditch in collaboration with Red Wolf. My name is Owen McNeil, joined by one of the senior hurlers, Roman Shorthall, he's the only guy here to my right. We're bereft of Paulie Doyle. He's off on his holidays, but we're going to have him back next week. Hope you're having a good old time of it, Paulie. It's been a great week for me personally. Donegal have taken a scalpel in the Ulster Championship. Derry, supposedly a new member of the Big Three, conceded 4 goals. Mickey Hart made a fool of. Fantastic, loving life. NBA playoffs have started. Luka Doncic is doing his thing. Dallas Mavericks have stolen a game against the Phoenix Suns last night, so it's been fantastic for me personally. We've got a lot to talk about this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the Stardust verdict, what it means for the victims, why it took so long for them to receive some level of justice, and also what this ruling actually means for them in their continuing fight for some level of material justice. We're also going to talk a little bit about other instances where the state has made assumptions about victims in certain cases and fought them every step of the way while they were looking for justice. We're also going to talk a little bit about the protest in UCD. Nancy Pelosi, is she, for you, is she more associated with her support for war crimes or how good she is at playing the stock market?
I would say war crimes.
War crimes. Yeah. Her stock market returns are ridiculous though, and it just so happens that some of these deals may involve some of her work as a legislator and as a public representative. Anyway, she was in UCD at an event sponsored by KPMG, where the president of the UCD Students' Union, Martha Niereda, took part in a one-person protest, and she was assaulted out of the meeting room. Let's call things as they were. We're going to talk about why she was assaulted out in the manner she was by a member of the Guards and compare it to how the Guards deal with other protests, like, say, for example, the protest at Roderick O'Gorman's house during the week. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the European elections with reference to Stephen Collins, the institution that is Stephen Collins in the Irish Times, who is terribly worried about the reputational damage that Ireland could suffer if we send the wrong people to Europe. But he mainly talks about, in his words, former communists, which I don't even know what that means if you're a former communist.
Yeah, he wants to make sure that we only send the right people.
The right people.
On the right.
And also with reference to some of the more recent additions to the European election ballot. But first off, Roman, tell us a little bit about what happened for the families and some of the people who were there in the Stardust in 1981 on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, so I suppose to go back to 1981, February 1981, 48 people were killed in a fire in the Stardust nightclub in Artane. To cut a long story short, you basically had a ruling that the fire was maliciously started. The owners got £500,000 at the time. That was the early 80s, so it was a lot of money. And they got that money because of that ruling.
Tell us a little bit about who the owners are.
Yeah, well, the owners were the Butterleys. And I think at the time it was Patrick Butterley was the owner, and the club was managed by his son, Eamon, who...
Fredo,
who we saw a little bit this week. Yeah, basically you had a 40-odd year long campaign of the families, and it's not like not to kind of like there's a much longer story to tell about that, but just like for the purposes of condensing it all, the easiest way to kind of summarize it is that it was like a torturous, 4-decade-long campaign of trying to kind of get to the truth of what happened and get some form of justice. So I think about 5 years ago, one of the victims' family members, I think it was Antoinette Keegan.
She was actually there, yeah.
Yeah. She applied to the Attorney General, who was Seamus Wolfe at the time, to have the entire inquest reopened. Surprisingly, I would say, and to give him credit, Seamus Wolfe agreed to reopen the inquest. And I suppose the conclusion of that, 5-odd-year process was this week when the jury at the inquest ruled that the deaths of those 48 people were unlawful killings.
It's also been reported and found that like it's not even just those 48 deaths, people who were, as we now can say and can confirm, that these people were unlawfully killed. There were 25 suicide attempts that were associated with that night as well. To go back a little bit, Fintan O'Toole had a good piece in the Irish Times. I'm actually not like, I think people on the left can sometimes be unfairly harsh on Fintan O'Toole. I like Fintan O'Toole. He is a liberal, and so it's cool if you know what you're getting,
yeah,
you're not going to be disappointed, And I think when Fintan O'Toole's good, he's very good. I think his piece in the Irish Times, though, it was an interesting one in that it's, again with the caveat, who cares what I think, but it highlighted for me both his strengths and weaknesses, where he said that, look, it's been a 43-year fight for justice, which is still ongoing, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it is going to have to continue on in a sense. But he talked about how a large part of why the victims and their family members have been made to fight for so long is because of what Fintan O'Toole said were assumptions made by the legal profession, the media, and the general public about the victims that were related to where they came from. Artane, a working class area of Dublin. Lynn Boylan was on Virgin Media this week, and she said something along the lines of, this happened in Bonnybrook. Would they have had to have fought for so long if it had happened in Donnybrook? Now, she got a little bit of criticism for that. I think she was completely correct to say that. But in Fintan O'Toole's piece, he was absolutely right to say, he said that it unleashed something, dark and contemptuous in the Irish id for people from these communities. The inquiry held, chaired by Justice Ronan Keane, in the relative immediate aftermath of the fire, it said that it was probably caused by arson, and it was, probably caused by, to put it bluntly, some oiks in the local area, and it suggested that that the arson may have been carried out to distract from a robbery that may have been taking place, at the same time, And he compared it to the Kerry Babies case, where Joanne Hayes was also wronged by the state and had a decades-long fight for justice. But he compared the findings in both of them and said that the judges who presided on them, and I don't know why he said this, he said that they're innately decent, fair-minded and courteous. Why is it important whether they're courteous or not, and why are you kind of giving them that, either giving them, some kind of credit for the decisions that they made, that, and why can't you kind of go, on the one hand, which is, look, for me, it's the downfall of liberalism, where you can say, you can go as far as going, God, I think there might be, some level of, depending on what word you want to use, distrust, contempt for working class communities on the part of the Irish establishment. Maybe the society is run at the expense of people from working class communities, but then the failure then to go, oh, maybe some of the state's institutions are at fault here, Why do you think when the case first came before this inquiry, that someone like Patrick Butterley was given the benefit of the doubt, whereas these communities weren't?
Well, I suppose like the Butterleys would have been seen like as upstanding members of the community, just running a decent establishment, and things just went wrong, and sure, it must have been some scumbag lighting a cigarette, or do you know what I mean? That would have been the attitude. That's still very much the attitude, and there's no point in kind of ignoring the elephant in the room in these situations, and that is that you have a judiciary like that is not very diverse. The vast majority of judges, I would say, that we see appointed come from middle or upper class backgrounds and have been privately educated, and that's fine. Like if somebody comes from that background and has been privately educated, but it does influence their thinking and their thought process. And particularly if we go back to that period, I think socio-economic prejudice was probably combined with other things worse then than it is now. Now I wouldn't say it's improved very much, but yeah, and I think that's as well why some people got annoyed about what Lynn Boylan said.
You're not supposed to say this stuff.
Yeah, you're not supposed to say this stuff, and it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people because it's true. That's why it's uncomfortable. It's like when I wrote when we did our state failures publication, and I wrote a piece on young working class men dying in Garda custody. And I said that one of the gentlemen that died in Garda custody was Terence Wheelock. And I had said that if he'd been from Killiney Hill instead of Summerhill, that, his family might have gotten more attention, or his family might have gotten some justice at this stage. And that is the reality. If Stardust had been in Donnybrook or Ballsbridge, there's no fucking way that the families wouldn't have gotten inquests reopened way before then. And I don't know if we would have gotten the same fucking, whitewash decision that the families got in the early 80s. That's the reality, but nobody wants to discuss that, Just to go back to what you said about Fintan O'Toole, yeah, it's great, a lot of the stuff that he's saying, but as you said, there's this kind of wall where that's as far as you can go. You can't break down the wall.
It should as well. It has occurred to me that you should at least acknowledge that, because we were speaking about class on this podcast, was it last week or so, and I think somebody said, what would they know about being working class, silver spoon, educated, blah, 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 which is, yeah, fine. And just acknowledge Fintan O'Toole actually does come from a working class background,
does, yeah.
Which I don't.
No, neither do I,
but I don't claim to.
No, I don't think you ever claim. I wasn't privately educated, though.
Yeah.
Were you?
No, yeah, exactly. And, that at the time as well, how do these things happen? And it's, how do these findings in inquiries happen? And Patrick Butterley, the owner of
the owner or the ogre.
Well, it was a kind of even to this day they kind of have a labyrinthine kind of setup of the companies that the Butterleys own and direct, and it was kind of similar back at the time of the fire where, I think, was it that Paddy Butterley owned it but then leased the premises to his son Fredo, Eamon, Eamon, who's still with us. Paddy Butterley, yeah, he was represented by two absolute mainstays of the Irish legal profession, Peter Sutherland, one of the architects of this state, and Niall McCarthy, who went on to become a Supreme Court judge. Butterley himself, he, and it does kind of go to show, years ago he contracted a writer to ghostwrite a memoir for him, which was never to be published. He wanted 90 copies of his memoir to give to his family to kind of tell his story. He's one of these, the Bill Cullen kind of stuff, a long way from penny apples. He used to sell vegetables, and then he worked his way up, self-made man, all this kind of stuff, and apparently, it's actually Ian Keogh, now editor of The Currency, he had a very good piece on it years back in the Business Post, and Ian Keogh he has some extracts from this memoir where, first of all, the chapter that deals with the Stardust fire, it's the shortest one in the book. And the fire itself really only gets a few paragraphs, and to say he was unapologetic would be an absolute understatement. He was actually pissed off about he spoke about how, first of all, they didn't get enough compensation. As you said, they sought £3 million in compensation for the supposed arson. They got £580,000. This wasn't enough for him because all that did was they didn't get their costs awarded to them, so that just went to paying their legal fees. So he was given out about that, was one thing. He went on he was given out about the fact that people would leave mementos at the site of the fire, and he said that he felt that people were blaming him. He also spoke about, he said that the one good thing that the tribunal did for him was that it said that they weren't to blame at all. To ask a very broad question, how does someone have that kind of mindset? How can someone be that brazen, that unapologetic? What kind of person is that?
Well, it's the same type of person that decorated a club on the cheap. Used the cheapest materials possible, which ultimately had very bad consequences when the club went on fire. It's the same sort of person who was so obsessed with profit that, ensured that there were chains put on the fire exits because apparently some people were getting in for free. And that was the biggest concern of the Butterleys. That,
profit's the word, though, isn't it?
Profit's the word.
Because you kind of look at all this stuff and you go, how does this happen? And it's like, money. Could it be the pursuit of profit above all else?
Yeah,
maybe throwing it out there.
Yeah, it's if you look at, I think it was called Priory Lodge, the apartments. Priory Hall, sorry, the apartments, which actually are not that far from Stardust. It's, thankfully, it didn't have the same consequences, but it's the same. And just for people who don't know, those apartments were a fire hazard. Basically, they didn't have. They didn't comply. I think that's an understatement. Say they didn't comply with fire regulations. I think they were pretty much, could be described as a death trap. And it was the same sort of mentality, just profit above, people's fucking safety.
I suppose you shouldn't expect anything more, I suppose, but it's how much is ever enough. Where the actual premises itself was a food factory, I think, that then they decided to kit out as a nightclub and kind of to make it as profit friendly as possible, you know, from start to finish, you know, get as many bars in as possible, make it as high capacity as possible. Even for the night in question, to get a late license, they had to classify it as a dinner dance, you know, like, so it was like every step of the way, it was just the extraction of profit at the expense of human life, you know, which was, as we have finally got full confirmation of this week. The brazenness from the family continues. Eamon Butterly, who was, apparently he used to describe himself as the manager of managers of the family business empire. He tried to reopen the Stardust on the anniversary, the 25th anniversary, I think, of the fire. It was in 2006. Victim families kind of rightfully objected to it, and he kind of quietly shelved those plans. But the Irish Independent, fair play to them, they sent a reporter over to. It's unclear where he has properties in different parts of the world. He's got a property in Malahide, a property in the Irish Independent. They tried to kind of, I'm not sure whether they were trying to protect his privacy or something, but they said that he has a property in something like an area of idyllic beauty or something. I think they suggested that it's an island off the coast of Ireland somewhere, I think. And he spends a lot of time in Tenerife, but an Irish Independent reporter showed up at his house, and a woman who, the Independent said that she refused to confirm whether she was Butterly's partner or not, but she said that she was renting the property. But Irish Independent reporter asked her, you know, does she think that the victims' families deserve an apology? And she literally just said, fuck off. Unchastened, to say the least. What does it mean, though, for victims and their families now that Simon Harris, who's been kind of praised across the board for his apology, he said that the state did the families wrong, that the state apologises without equivocation. What do you think that means for, you know, on the one hand, because to go back, you had the Butterleys who received almost £600,000. Families eventually got some form of redress. I think one family, yes, received 100,000, but on average it was 5,000 to 10,000 each. What does it mean now for people still looking for that material justice?
It's hard to say, like, what it means for the families, because, you know, only they know what it means for them. I mean, I'd imagine after that length of time that they feel some sort of relief that the state is putting its hands up and saying, yeah, look, we did wrong here. But I don't think anyone, I don't think the state deserves praise. I don't think Simon Harris deserves praise. Like, an apology is, you know, a fucking bare minimum, you know, and like, if it's not accompanied by, you know, proper compensation for these families, then it doesn't mean anything.
You have, you know, Mary Lou McDonald and Lynn Boylan, who both spoke very well about what the verdict means for families and, you know, how long they had to fight for this level of justice. And then, of course, you have, in response to Sinn Féin members speaking articulately and eloquently about what it means for victims, you have this chorus of people going, and what about the IRA? What about what your boys did, you know? While also eulogising what Simon Harris has said in this apology after 43 years and after what the state has done, and missing the point that this is what the state does. It's what his party does as well. You know, Michael Noonan, who's a real favourite of ours, he's my number one Fine Gael bête noire, actually, I've got to say. And what he did to Bridget McCole, a woman from Glenties, who contracted hepatitis C because of a bad blood transfusion, and had to fight the state every step of the way. The state effectively tried to pay her off and give her compensation while refused to admit fault and refused to investigate how this mistake actually occurred. And Bridget McCall said, no, I'm going to fight, and I want some level of actual justice here. And Michael Noonan, as health minister at the time, his response to that was, okay, well, she's first of all not going to be able to claim anonymity. She's going to have to use her real name in pursuing the state, and we're going to fight her right up until she was on her literal deathbed before she finally got what she was seeking. And that's how the state treats these people, particularly people like Bridget McCall and people like the Stardust families. It's all right, if you want to take us on, we're going to fight you every step of the way. We're going to get our lawyers in, which is, I presume that's going to be the next step of, the state has suggested that there is going to be a full redress scheme, but, you know, Peter Sutherland's equivalent and counterparts now will be coming in to go, all right, how do we get these costs down? People don't make that link between, people just see Simon Harris acting like a statesman and go, isn't he great?
Yeah, I mean, and it as you said, like it is, that's what the state does. Like it doesn't say sorry until it's completely fucking backed into a corner. Like that's, like, we're talking like 43 years later that they're saying sorry. Like, I don't know how anyone can kind of like accept that as nothing more than, you know, this is as far as we could take, you know, not apologising to people. We've taken it as far as we can. We've gotten this verdict. We have to say sorry. We've no choice now. Like, politically, like, it would look bad if we don't. That's all it is, like. But of course, it's fantastic because Simon Harris said.
To stay on the theme of state and intrusion on the people of Ireland, this week, Nancy Pelosi, US Democrat congressperson, was in UCD gala dinner in O'Reilly Hall to celebrate her public service, sponsored by KPMG, which I would love to know the details of what that sponsorship entailed. You know, Nancy Pelosi, who is, without fail, she and her husband Paul, they beat the stock market by about 70% every year. You know, he's an investor himself. Nancy Pelosi is a
war criminal.
Yeah, shrewd investor and war criminal. You know, this is someone who, she actually voted against the Iraq war, but voted to keep funding it at every step of the way. And now she offers her, well, I would say, arguably unqualified support for Israel's war crimes.
She's a genocide consultant now, isn't it?
Yeah. And she's like a single issue politician as well. Well, apart from, she loves Israel and she hates Trump. This is, a really important moment for American democracy. But she and her partner are worth, it's in the hundreds of millions, and her husband exercised call options, basically shorting Alphabet just before a big antitrust case was being taken against Google. Like the Pelosi's made a bunch of that, and there are, like, she is considered so good an investor that investment gurus will sincerely, without irony, will offer her up as, oh, here are the Nancy Pelosi investments that you should be copying right now. So it's like, what I'm trying to say is she's a fucking hack, and she's a rich hack, and I'd love to know, she was brought over by UCD to be given some bullshit honorary doctorate. It was the L&H Society who brought her over. And while she was there, Martha Nerida, president of UCD's SU, she stood up and she called her a Zionist and a war criminal. I thought it was just inspiring in general. Like, and I love to see people, get up and do something like that. Someone like Martha Nerida, who had, in that context, she had, talk about who had a Democratic mandate in that room. Is it Martha Nerida or war criminal Nancy Pelosi, But even aside from that, I can't figure out what she's saying in the second part of what she says. But as these, I thought they were Nancy Pelosi's own security, but it was members of An Garda Síochána came in and assaulted her out of the room. But as you're saying,
very
like,
brave of them.
Yeah.
They're brave boys in blue.
But I thought, her tone in the second thing of what she said was very slick. I thought she was like, "Come on, man, what are you doing here?" Like, you know. She gets up and she says in this room, while this war criminal, this hack US politician is there, and she gets up and says, "You're a Zionist and a war criminal,"
which is true.
Yeah. In that moment, right? Why did Gardaí rush into action like that and like grip her, manhandle her out of the room? Like, why did that happen?
Because they didn't want us to be embarrassed in front of the very important Yanks. I'm sure the GRA will have something to say about it, that, you know, these very brave guards were just doing their job, which is to drag women out for standing up and saying a couple of words.
When you see something like that happen and you see these guards do that, do you think that was a personal decision by those guards, or were the guards sat down beforehand and said, like, they had to have known that something like this was going to happen, and did they talk about then, this is what we're going to do?
It's hard to say, like, but I mean, that's kind of like traditionally how the guards have approached, you know, any sort of like protest of the left or of the broad left. That's how they've approached it, with violence. I mean, it was the same with the Debenhams workers. It was the same at the May Day protests. It was the same at I think it was 2010, maybe 2011 student protests. Violence. Anti-water charges, batons, violence, assaulting people. It's nothing new. I mean, that's how they deal with people on the left.
Do you think that this kind of approach, do you think that it's discussed at some level within the guards, either formally or informally, that there may be the odd memo here or there that calls for this kind of response to left protests? Or do you think it's a personal, reflexive, instinctive thing on the part of these guards?
I think it's just part of the culture. I mean, I think it's almost like it's just a kind of a silent thing, like, where I think it's almost like when you join, that's what you sign up for, like that, you know, this is who we are, this is An Garda Síochána, like, this is how we police people on the left, this is how we, you know, approach any sort of like threat to kind of capitalism, or, you know, it's just, it's an institutional thing, you know.
And it is, that was, you know, when you talk about, you know, An Garda Síochána, guardians of the peace, you know, what does it take for that peace to be fractured, or, you know, peace for whom? And in this instance, you know, it was peace for KPMG, who were sponsoring the event, which, like, to go back to that, I mean, like, did they pay for her fucking airfare and hotel room? Like make her pay herself, like, fuck me.
She's not exactly short of a few quid.
Yeah. You know, this whole thing of which is happening more and more now, and people are, particularly in the US, people using threats against students, or you're not going to be employable if you engage in this kind of protest, you know. I've got to say, like, I take the opposite thing, where some people were criticizing Martha Nierida for the protest. I've got to say, I would criticize the students who got their little shirt and tie on and
got their selfie.
KPMG, please employ me afterwards, and going for dinner with Enda Kenny and Bertie Ahern afterwards. You know, it's a kind of a...
It's not very radical, is it?
It's like a debutante ball for the managing partners of KPMG and Deloitte of tomorrow, and it's them going to go and like, yeah, I'm cool with all this. I'm cool with Nancy Pelosi. I'm cool with you guys, you know.
Yeah.
But their peace was fractured, and Nancy Pelosi's peace was fractured, and then the guards then see it as, fuck, better get in there and get this woman out of the room, and
drag her out of the room. Like,
yeah.
I mean, only a court can decide, whether it was assault or not. But like, I don't see like what lawful excuse there was to manhandle her like that. She wasn't given a warning or said, look, will you cut it out and come on outside? There was no gentle pat on her shoulder or anything. I mean, actually, if you look at what's going on in the UK at the moment with the Met Police and Gideon Falter, I think his name
I love
is,
that guy.
The guards talk about, like, the GRA were talking about, like, we don't know how to deal with, how much violence we can use, or, when should we use violence? But like that interaction is a perfect example of, criticism of the police aside. I think that interaction between that police sergeant and Gideon Falter was a perfect example of how police should deal with situations like that. But here you just had these pig-headed guards just run in and, no sort of like, come on, like, let's, cut it out, just fucking dragged her out.
Just fucking know that those guards were going home to their wives. Oh, sure, had to drag a fucking idiot out of the room.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't particularly I don't like speaking in kind of melodramatic terms, believe it or not. I don't kind of like moralizing about things, but I actually did find the scenes just disgusting. And you talk about who had a mandate in that room. She's the president of the SU, and people can sneer at student politics all they want, but she put herself up for election, and she was there representing students, many of whom would feel the same as her, and she just to be assaulted out of the room like that.
I don't think it's a criminal offence to stand up and fucking speak at an event,
And, personally as well, I do think, symbols of a democratic deficit, where I do think that if you go around the people of Ireland and ask them, here, what do you think of Nancy Pelosi? What do you think? Do you think, to use, the L&H Society's words and KPMG's words, do you think, she's led a life of just unparalleled public service and should be rewarded for such? Or do you think she's a grifting war criminal? And to speak in very binary terms here, do you think that the people of Ireland would agree more with the sentiment that exercised Martha Ní Riada more than the sentiment that exercised the careerists and genuflectors in UCD and KPMG, but yet the guards went out of their way to protect those people?
As they always do, that's their job.
But it is, though, it's inspiring. I just love to see it. I love to see Laszlo Malnárfi in Trinity as well, the president of the SU there. He's there's a certain radicalism in both in Trinity and even in UCD. I remember, fair play to Martha Ní Riada, I remember years ago when I was in UCD, Antonín Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice, he came to give a talk in UCD, and again it was the L&H were holding it, and I kind of said, fuck it. I went along with a few classmates, and this was it was kind of mid to late noughties, so it was post the war on terror. Public sentiment wasn't great as far as the US went, and also I would have associated Scalia with his role in the election of George W. Bush, where Scalia was appointed to the Supreme Court by Ronald Reagan, so a mate of George W. Bush's idol fella, basically, appointed there, and he was known for, he was Mr. Anti-abortion, anti-gay rights. Like, that was really his bread and butter, But he ordered against a recount during the Gore Bush presidential campaign, and very controversial at the time, remained controversial years afterwards and to this day, And fair play, the room was packed actually, and interestingly, when you see the number of people who showed up for Nancy Pelosi versus how many people showed up for Scalia back in the day, like a lot more there for Anthony Scalia, and it was a guy in front of me, he stands up and he asks a question about Scalia's role in ordering that there wouldn't be a recount of votes in Florida. And Scalia just said, "Hey, buddy, it's been 10 years, get over it." And the room erupted in applause, where usually he was always that kind of has always been kind of full of genuflectors, but it was maybe not so much anymore.
The future is bright.
The future is bright. Future is not bright for one man. We're going to get on to the take of the week. Paulie Doyle, sorry that you're not here. I'm going to try and give it a go here. Take of the week, Stephen Collins, who can always be relied on in the Irish Times he can be relied on a couple of things. He can be relied on to say, it's the world's not looking good right now. We're becoming increasingly polarized. We're becoming increasingly.
He's a bastion of sensibility.
Sensibility, yeah. He can be relied upon to write the most sensible things in the country that will appeal only to a very small. I don't know anyone who goes, "Oh, class! Can't wait to read a Stephen Collins piece." I don't know. Maybe there are people. And he can be relied upon to write the same column over and over and over again. And what he has written about this week is Ireland's reputation is at stake. Is at stake here on a European level if we send the wrong people to Europe. And he's talking mainly about Mick Wallace, Claire Daly, Luke Ming Flanagan, and Chris McManus, actually, the Sinn Féin.
Yeah, that was kind of his wild card, wasn't it?
And he described them as former communists, which is like, are they former communists?
Yeah, I think was he talking about the group that they're a part of?
Oh yeah, the left group.
The left group,
mainly that former communists.
Yeah, because I don't think Mick Wallace is a former communist.
He's a former property developer.
Yeah, very typical Stephen Collins stuff, we've this big threat hanging over us, whether it's Sinn Féin or Claire Daly or, people like that, and, we need to do the sensible thing. We need to clone Mairead McGuinness and just vote for Mairead McGuinness and get loads of Mairead McGuinnesses over to Europe.
Though, what's the one problem for people like Stephen Collins is that Stephen Collins wants a load of, as you say, Mairead McGuinness's or Maria Walsh's, but how much it cost Fine Gael to bring Maria Walsh to us?
I think she was expensive, wasn't she?
200 grand. This is how much it cost to get her elected. And go over there and just be a body in the EPP to go, yeah, I'll vote along with the EPP, which is kind of all she does. She's been on the same buzz as Stephen Collins. She's been, she gave an interview with the Irish Independent, and you kind of read something and you go, yeah, okay, this is grand, but what do you actually believe? She had that, that campaign video. If you're like me, you remember things like Tamagotchis and the Spice Girls. She's never really progressed beyond that, where all she said was, again, she was like Stephen Collins. In fact, Stephen Collins might as well have just transcribed what Maria Walsh said in this earlier interview, where we should be worried about polarization. We should be worried about MEPs who aren't, fully committed to the European project. we should be worried about Ireland's reputation on the global stage, etc., etc., etc. And which is fine. They're all worried about that kind of thing, but it's going to cost Fine Gael and or Fianna Fáil a lot of money to give us more of these identikit, don't believe in anything MEPs like Maria Walsh.
I just think, like, when you look at someone like Maria Walsh, who, like, really has achieved fuck all, like, and has never really...
She voted with the far right to not save migrants and who were lost in the Mediterranean Sea. That was,
as
she
did
achieved
Mairead
that.
McGuinness,
As did Mairead McGuinness.
That's her greatest achievement. Like, just the fucking balls on these people, like, to have a go at someone like Luke Ming Flanagan, like, who has done a lot more than they'll ever do. You know, has made a lot more noise about things. You know, like, these people like Maria Walsh, they're never going to, you know, as we saw, like, when Luke Ming Flanagan had a go on Garda Síochána, you know, and people, I think Maria Walsh was one of the people to jump on that, or maybe it was Colin Markey as well, maybe another Fine Gael MEP. Like, you know, they're never going to, you know, raise the issue of whistleblowers, or, you know, that's not what they're there for. I mean, and that's what people like Stephen Collins wants, is like people like Maria Walsh who don't make any fucking noise and, you know, wear the green jersey, shut the fuck up, and just, you know, everything is great, Ireland is great, the EU is great. That's the sort of people he wants us to elect. One of his problems with Luke Ming Flanagan was that he wrote in the piece that Ming supported Brexit, which was all right. And his other problem with Mick Wallace and Claire Daly was, you know, that Naomi O'Leary piece about how Mick Wallace and Claire Daly were very popular in state media over in places like China. Which used to employ me. Some people are guilty. I think Simon Coveney was popular as well, though, wasn't he, in China? Oh yeah, Simon Coveney, big man in China. Yeah. I don't think he had a nickname though, like Mick Wallace. The Golden Line or something. The Golden Line. But it was kind of a little bit revealing in that, you know, Collins said that Mick Wallace and Claire Daly, they pop up a lot in Chinese state media, where I think the words you used was, you know, they're shown as endorsing regime views, you know. Almost implicit in what he's written there is that, all right, well, all of the people we elect should reflect the Irish regime view, which is that we're good Europeans, wrap us in the starry blue and yellow, and let's continue doing what we're told to do by Brussels. And like, he doesn't have any sort of, like, he's the type of person that is very, like, you know, democracy is a threat, but there's no self-awareness when he writes these pieces where he's basically, you know, saying that, criticising people who have exercised their democratic right to elect Claire Daly and Luke Ming Flanagan. Like, he's saying, well, you shouldn't be doing that. You should only be voting for one type of person that I fucking like. You know? Well, listen, guys, thanks so much. What can we say from the two senior hurlers? We'll be back with you next week. Hopefully, Irish democracy will still be with us. I hope it is. If not for anyone else, but for Stephen Collins, we'll chat to you then.